This is episode 729 of the Rio Grande Foundation's Tipping Point, New Mexico. I'm Paul Gessing.
And I'm Wally Drangmeister.
I'm president of the Rio Grande Foundation, New Mexico's free market think tank. You can find out more about the foundation at riograndefoundation.org. Oh, Wally, we got a lot of interesting topics to discuss today. And one of them is, normally we talk about very well defined and straightforward issues: the gross receipts tax, personal income taxes, school choice, etc. This one, it showed up in the Albuquerque Journal, and it had me scratching my head a little bit. I'm just going to say that. Uh, what I'm discussing here is Professor Manuel Montoya from University of New Mexico, and an article that appeared based on a presentation he gave to a business group here in Albuquerque. And without going too deep into things, the professor, I'll read this quote. Frankly, this is from him. New Mexico looks, acts, and thinks like the emerging economies that by the end of this century are going to become epicenters of the world economy. He also cites the BRICS nations: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then he even makes a category that I've never heard of. I've certainly heard of the BRICS before: mint nations, those being Mexico, Indonesia, Nigeria, and Turkey. Uh, is New Mexico like any of these nations in any reasonable way, or is New Mexico emerging in any reasonable way? And of course, into the century, we're talking the year 2100, 75 years. We'll all be dead and gone by then, Wally. I hate to say it. Uh, the whole world can look so different within that time period that it's impossible for anybody to prognosticate what New Mexico or other countries, let alone other states or the United States, will look like in 75 years when our kids are, my kids are getting to the end of their lives, if not already dead and gone as well. So it's a very unusual and interesting presentation. But what's your take?
Well, Paul, just so you know, I read that article or op ed,
Uh
whatever
huh.
you call it, and I was like, I was left scratching my head. It was like, I don't
So it
know.
really doesn't have to do with how much hair you have on the top of your
Oh,
head. You're
man,
still scratching your head just like I was.
I hope they edited his piece in a poor way
Yeah.
where, it was one of those where sometimes you read things, you're like, maybe there's a pony inside this inside this pile of hay or whatever it is. But that one is like I could not figure out what his point was. So it's like on some of those consortia, it's like, are we like them in that? What are we, impoverished and corrupt, and we can come from behind? Maybe that was his point. I sort of doubt it. That doesn't sound like what a UNM professor says. Is that or is he saying that even if things are really horrible, they can get better? Just look at the economy in China, for example. Uh, I don't know. So anyway, I would. It's one of those I would like to be able to ask him. Again, what is your point exactly? Because it certainly wasn't apparent to me. Now, does New Mexico have some opportunities? Absolutely. Does New Mexico have some challenges? Some of which are historical and many of which are self induced policy? Absolutely. Is there something in there that's going to help us move forward? I'm not sure.
Well, just to be clear, I did reach out to Professor Montoya and asked him to be on the podcast. He politely said no. I then asked him, he says he's developing these ideas. He was pleased by the amount of attention that they received. Sounds like we weren't the only ones scratching our heads, perhaps. And then I asked him if he would be interested in going to coffee. So far, that is not in the cards either. So if I was to kind of distill this all down, I think he might have gotten a little bit out over his skis in thinking that he had some kind of big theorem cooked up about New Mexico really embracing the future and how we're going to be a big player on the international stage. And I agree, we have absolutely the potential to be a major player in a lot of different ways. But until politically or culturally we embrace some of these means of making New Mexico a more prosperous, dynamic, influential state, we're going to be stuck in the same boat as we have been before. And you know, any thoughts on that, Wally?
Well, no, absolutely, Paul. So, again, using the China of the BRICS.
Yes. Brazil,
Okay,
Russia, India, China, South Africa. Very diverse group of nations there.
yes, and those are nations that kind of want to band together and take the dollar out as the reserve currency
Right.
is their main, as far as I can tell, their main goal. But China, not that long ago, was relatively unindustrialized. Their economy was, in a way different uh, situation than it is today, and they did a lot of things. Some of which I think the United States could learn from. Some of which are disasters that I think we will only in the future see what some of their fallacies were with regard to China. And let's make no mistake about it, it is a brutal third world dictatorship at any level. And so if that's what it can you have good economics in that? They probably had the best economics for a relatively totalitarian government.
Yeah.
So I will give them that. Is it sustainable? Who knows? Will there be a big collapse? People have been predicting that for a while. We will have to see. Although people have been predicting a collapse of the United States for a while, we'll have to see on that one from an economic point of view.
Yeah. Just to kind of go into a little more detail on that, I'm going to analyze briefly these countries. Brazil, they consider themselves the United States of South America. They're governed by a socialist, Lula da Silva. Uh, yes, they have a lot of potential, uh, but every country that's got a large population and kind of calls the shots, at least on their own continent, has a lot of potential, but they have their political problems. Russia, military power, natural resource power, but demographically they're in a collapse, and they have real social and economic problems. And the war they've been fighting with Ukraine hasn't improved that. India,
No, it's made it,
yeah,
yeah, it's accelerated whatever was likely to happen economically.
India is has grown and fallen back and grown and fallen back. There's certainly a lot of potential there. They have a huge population, but they just can't get out of their own way from a policy perspective. China, of course, they're a totalitarian uh, nation, as you say. They've when you have a billion people and you go from complete communist domination to something that's a bit more of a mix, it's going to create waves simply because you have so many people, and they've grown from a billion to I think 1.3 or 1.4, but their demographics are going to turn south for them. And you can only get so far by going from abject communism to a mix. I don't think China shows any signs of making a next step. And South Africa, they're a deeply problematic place with their racial policies, anti-white policies in that nation, and I don't really find them to be a reasonable kind of player on an international basis. Yeah, they're relatively well off by African standards, but that's none of these are places that you say, ah, yes, New Mexico, we're on the verge of being like one of these places for good or for ill.
Yeah, and then we're more likely to say we are like them right now from a negatives
Right.
point of view, I think, but maybe not. So, the other thing about just one final point about China, it's like if you were to take working conditions in China and try to impose that anywhere in the United States,
Yep.
believe me, there would be a shock. The other issue is
For the
environmentally.
that would be a well-deserved shock because
Yes,
that
yeah.
China is not what we want to
No,
emulate
no,
here.
no, no. The other thing is environmentally, China's environmental situation is a disaster. Now, having said that, they do a lot of the things that the US loves, the results of the products that are produced from the environmental disaster that is China. But we pretend that it doesn't happen, not that it happens elsewhere and it's still impacting the world. That's the other thing that has really helped them move up the value chain, as it will, to the point where now they have a lot of things that are not like that. They have a lot of mid-level and low-level semiconductor. They're not the high level like Taiwan and the United States and some other countries like that. But yes, this is an interesting thing, and I would look forward to round two of this because it's one of those. He used a lot of interesting, hazy comparisons that I'd like to see more. What did he really mean? And because maybe there is something in there. It just shows, Paul. It's almost like people who read Shakespeare. You study it long enough, you can think it means almost anything. And so maybe everyone in New Mexico is kind of looking for a path forward. It's like maybe there's a path forward in what he's saying.
Yeah, and I'm not going to. I've actually heard from other people that he's a very good and compelling teacher and professor at UNM. Sounds like somebody who's got some very heterodox policy ideas. Of course, he's in the economics department. Like I said, I'd be very interested in having him come on. I will definitely challenge him because I don't think his ideas have the air of reasonableness to them in a lot of ways. Now, if he'd said, Argentina, to use an example, Argentina being a nation that in 1900 was one of the wealthiest places on the planet and then suffered from socialism and socialistic and fascistic policies of the Perones, and then went into hyperinflation in a more modern era, and had really fallen on hard times. And then Malay comes in and embraces free market, consistent public policy in a free market direction, takes a chainsaw, literally, figuratively, to the bureaucracy, cuts taxes, gets rid of regulations. If Montoya was talking about how that could be a model, or Argentina should be or could be a model for even some of these BRICS nations, then I would feel, not just intrigued, but I would feel like, hey, this guy's going in a direction that I think he's onto something. Uh, New Mexico is a lot like Argentina before it elected Malay. It is a country that has resources and potential, but that has been unrealized. Thankfully, we don't print our own currency, or I'm sure we would be in a hyperinflation like Argentina was before Malay took office. But uh, there's got to be something there, in my estimation, to lead one to believe that, oh, yeah, New Mexico's on the cusp of a big change. I don't see it. Uh, and we need a Malay figure actually in New Mexico. That would be a great opportunity for reform of this state.
Yeah, and speaking of getting out a little bit too far over your skis, Paul, I'll throw one last comment out there. Maybe New Mexico could learn from some of the best things that old Mexico have done economically. I would argue that states like Georgia and part of the South have done some things similar to Mexico that have allowed them to go forward economically, not having all the unions involved necessarily, having more international partnerships, things like that. So, who knows? So I'm sure there's a model out there somewhere.
Yeah, well, I'll go with the Argentine model. Although, being a U.S. state versus an independent nation, I find that alone is a questionable uh, comparison in general, because the problems of a U.S. state versus a nation, thankfully, we don't suffer under the social policies of China or even South Africa or Russia. We do have a lot of advantages, but that just kind of downplays the comparison to begin with. But let's talk about a economic policy that New Mexico's pursued that has kept us in the relative realm of poverty and economic failure. I am referring to New Mexico's film industry and the fact that uh, we have been pumping money into this industry since the early days of the Richardson administration, even Gary Johnson to an extent, but Richardson really created the uh, model for New Mexico's film subsidy program. 25 cents on the dollar that we repaid under Richardson to the film industry. Then Martinez came along, wasn't able to reduce that subsidy rate, but she did place a $50 million annual cap on spending by the state of New Mexico. Of course, those Hollywood film companies were able to then accumulate debts from the state of New Mexico that they then were able to cash in when Michelle Lujan Grisham took office, paid off $300 million or thereabouts of film subsidies. But we are told recently that New Mexico's film activity has fallen from $740 million down to $323 million in the last year. Now, on one hand, I say, well, good. New Mexico's losing less money by having these Hollywood film companies come and then we're paying out massive amounts of cash. The bad news, of course, is that this is an industry that we have subsidized in myriad ways, not just through the annual film subsidy. And one of those ways was by subsidizing Santa Fe Studios, which has been open since 2011. They got a $10 million grant from the state. They got $6.5 million worth of loan guarantees. And Santa Fe County kicked in $3.6 million worth of infrastructure investment. Uh, and then they also got an industrial revenue bond, meaning that the facility has not paid property taxes, or at least not certainly at market rate property taxes, nowhere near for its entire time as it's been open. And yeah, so to say that New Mexico has spent heavily to attract Hollywood productions, and now the industry is in a recession or even a depression, and many wonder, industry insiders wonder if it is the new normal due to all kinds of market forces and changing consumer behavior. This was supposed to be the big thing, Wally. Yet another time where the politicians get that wrong. Shock of shocks.
Yes, Paul, and the film industry, even back to when New Mexico got into the subsidization business, it was always the shakiest financial model. As we used to say, what sort of project-oriented business wouldn't want to do business in New Mexico if you could get half of your expenses covered by the state, at an extreme level, which we have gotten to that at times. Uh,
40,
the,
40% is the
yeah, for yes,
high water mark. Yep.
yep. So, like I say, we you could do a lot of things with that, but the other one is that in addition to just being a model that once those rates go down, uh, the film industry has proven they'll move to another state in a heartbeat that has higher rates. But that's not what's happening in this case. I think in this case we're seeing a kind of structural uh, foundational shift because as you alluded to, it's like things are more streaming, there's a lot more technology, the business is changing. So this isn't the film industry of 10 or 20 or 30 years ago. This is a whole new ball game, and I think it's done much differently, and there may not be any level of subsidies that can have it come back to its future standpoint, or maybe we could just pay for 100% of their costs, and they'll flock here to produce more, streaming video types of things. And I don't know. This is just a weird one. So why is this such a favored industry? As always confused me, Paul, because it's almost like there's economic studies about some industries always they get more capital investment that makes sense. The airline industry is one that they've never there's never been this huge return on investment time for the airline industry, but boy, you can always get people that will invest in it. Well, in the film industry, it's one of those things. This level of subsidy in any other industry would just be there would be screaming, there'd be protests in the street, but for some reason, these poor Hollywood moguls, we can make their lives easier by subsidizing them to such a huge level. And maybe it could be as simple as because every now and then, as a politician, you get to meet a movie star. I don't know. It's very interesting to me.
Yeah, just looking at them on the surface level, Rio Grande Foundation's always opposed uh, the Hollywood subsidies at the state level for the simple reason that we can argue till we're blue in the face over certain inducements for businesses to come here. Industrial revenue bonds being a great example. Eliminating the property tax. What they basically do with an IRB is that the government takes over the lease of a given piece of real estate, whether it's the Santa Fe studios or Intel was under this regime for a long time. Once government is technically the owner of something, they no longer they don't pay property taxes on that particular uh, plot of land or that building or whatever it may be. We can argue whether that's a good policy or not, but I will never support a industry or a business receiving checks as Hollywood has 25, 35, 40% from the taxpayers of the state of New Mexico. That is simply outrageous. And it highlights many of the problems. One is that Hollywood is very mobile. They will always go for the best, subsidy they can get. And I think international is part of the deal right now. They're able to get lower wages and lower filming costs, even when you factor in the subsidization at the state level here in New Mexico. Uh, you have different, consumer tastes. You've got the business responding to changes in the industry, the pandemic and streaming and all these other things that I don't really know enough about to get into. But the fact is that when you have government officials picking and choosing winners and losers, chances are very good they are going to be uh, picking losers because almost never, almost never do politicians zig when the others zag. There is a tremendous groupthink approach. These are not original thinkers, no offense. They're not saying, hey, we should subsidize the oil and gas industry
No.
in some massive way because we want New Mexico to be number one. I'm not even saying we should do that. We shouldn't be cutting checks to any industry, whether it's film or oil and gas. But the idea, if you can imagine some politician, even a Republican, but certainly not a Democrat, coming out and making those kinds of statements, it would be absolutely absurd. Hollywood, we're one of many states that subsidize that particular industry, and they've had a long run where they were constantly taking more and more money from us. Uh, Now, hopefully that's changed. Of course, now we have facilities that it's not just the 40% that we've handed them. It's also things like schools of film at C&M and other places that we've tied money from the taxpayers in. We have the Next Generation Media Academy, $40 million for that, and then numerous other programs where we pumped LEDA money, local economic development, corporate welfare money, and others. So if we had just limited to the 40%, we would be in better shape. You know, the studios at Mesa del Sol, they were called Albuquerque Studios. I think they were Netflix. When Santa Fe came out with their Santa Fe Studios, the folks at Albuquerque Studios who originally built that thing, they did that with their own resources. They said, well, we're going to build this studio and respond to this subsidy. And then they actually reached out to us and we had a cordial exchange because they said, well, I know you don't like the Hollywood film subsidies that New Mexico's offering, but at least we're only taking one cut, one bite at the apple. Santa Fe, they're asking for a bunch of local and state subsidies, and they're getting them. So now they're going to be undercutting us with the combined effects of the state subsidy and these local subsidies. Now they're for sale, and I think it's safe to say that Hollywood as a general industry is in disarray. And while New Mexico, has pumped a lot of money, hundreds of millions of dollars into Hollywood and Hollywood subsidies, uh, you know, just take it to the basic level. If my kids are looking at going to one of these programs that now the taxpayers have financed these schools around New Mexico, I look at it and say, well, is this an industry that is going to be growing and prosperous and something that, will be available for you in 10, 15 years when you get your degree and get rolling into this industry? I think we've made bad investments in that regard as well.
Yes, Paul, and back to, and you alluded to this a little bit, like with industrial revenue bonds. I believe the idea was always like, okay, we're going to make it easy for them to build something here that will outlast the tax break that they get, that the company will stay, the industry will grow. And the same sort of thinking happened with the film subsidy, other than the fact that it's totally project based, and
Right.
most of the talent, most of the equipment goes back to the warehouses, not always in New Mexico, a lot of times in other states. And then the the capital investment had been made by the industry and is now being made by the taxpayer, but even that's not enough to necessarily establish this as a sustainable industry in New Mexico with everything that's going on. And so, it's one of those. This is not in jest, Paul. If we had a thing where we said, we would like New Mexico to be the accounting capital of the United States. And so, therefore, we are going to subsidize all new accounting salaries for 10 years. We're going to pay 50% of that salary. I bet we get some accounting firms in here hiring some people and doing some things. But once that subsidy went away, will the project go away, or would the industry sustain itself here? I have doubts.
Yeah, and of course we could argue, well, you know, states like Alabama and others who have spent heavily to bring automotive uh, plants to their to their states. And I'm not going to go into all the ins and outs of all that, but at least that is an industry that, you know the idea that we're going to forego cars anytime in the near future on a broad scale is hard to fathom. And the fact that you have a factory that, it's not like a studio can either have or not have projects going on at any given time. There's no guarantee. But when that is a facility invested in and owned by the automotive company, they're going to be using that by and large, unless there is a recession or some drying up in demand for automotive products. So very different. Not, again, not saying that we should engage in that kind of policy making behavior, but we're talking about less optimal situations. Uh, I would much rather see us cutting taxes, making us as a state attractive to all business, whether they're accountants or Hollywood or automotive construction, building, all of those. Moving on, we spent quite a bit of time on those two topics, but they're meaty topics. This one's a little quicker. New Mexico's automatic voter registration law took effect July 1st, 2025. This is thanks to a law passed in 2023's legislative session. We opposed automatic voter registration at the time. And I will simply read a brief email from somebody who recently was at the MVD DMV to renew his driver's license. He says, it was a simple renewal, new pick, eye test. At the end of the process, I was required to register to vote. I saw no option to opt out. I didn't even see a button that said, no thanks, already registered. Uh, he said, why must I fill this out? They had no answer at the DMV. The process is all online. You sign with a vertical stream with your finger. Good luck matching signatures with that system down the line. So presumably he's now a registered voter twice. And for those who like, I'm a bad example because Paul is pretty much Paul, but you could be Wally Drangmeister or Walter Drangmeister and maybe some combination thereof. And you're registered to vote one way, then you go to the DMV or heaven forbid the SNAP office or some other office that is doing this kind of automatic voter registration under state law. It's not just voting; it is other government benefits. And now you've got two versions of yourself registered to vote, Wally. It's just great opportunities for voter fraud and the voter rolls to become bloated and further make them inaccurate.
Yes, Paul, and as we've seen, nobody ever likes to take anyone off of a voter roll, even if they're there multiple times. So, we have this to look forward. Maybe we'll have a contest in a few years to see who's registered the most times through the state system. And it is interesting the fact that there's not a I'm already registered, don't need this.
Yeah.
That's more than a little disturbing.
Yeah, you would think that at least the very minimum that you could say, hey, I've already registered. There is apparently an opt-out process, but it's not done there on site. It's something that you have to go and actively engage with. And you know,
Get a
th-
notary public, your attorney, your birth certificate.
yeah, just ridiculous. Wally, as we record this, we are not, you could call it a stone's throw from East Central, which unfortunately, while there are many lovely places around the general area where we are recording this, East Central is not one of them. And it's, I think, the lead contributor to New Mexico's number one in the nation pedestrian fatality problem. But there is money being pumped by the city of Albuquerque into doing what's called a road diet and making East Central theoretically more pedestrian friendly. And that may reduce deaths and pedestrian incidents along East Central, but it more than likely will do more to just shift those kinds of incidents. And it would ultimately behoove the city of Albuquerque to enforce jaywalking laws and try to address the homeless problem along East Central that is undoubtedly the real cause for our woes along East Central. But Wally, I won't say that your property values should be impacted by what happens on East Central, but you are definitely familiar with that stretch of road. And we're going to watch it all together as they begin construction on this thing here in a few, I think, weeks, maybe a month or so. What's your take on East Central?
Well, East Central and a little further down started out as the war zone, was rebranded to the International District. And then in the fentanyl era, East Central, all the way up to Tramway, really. And I would throw Zuni under the bus because it's the same thing. It's now a lot of people call it zombie land. You see people that, yes, there's huge amounts of jaywalking, but there's also people that are very, very either mentally ill or very inebriated or both, and they'll just walk in front of traffic. So let me just say that my defensive driving meter goes to a 10 when I'm on parts of East Central because I've had people literally walk in front of me uh, at times and places that it's just boggles the mind that they thought that that was safe for them to do. And, and maybe they're to the point where they really are just so stoned out of their mind, they have no ability to make judgments. But yeah, so jaywalking, jaywalking's what used to happen in a polite place where you just crossed in the street with no traffic going either way and you
Right.
wouldn't down to the corner. This is a whole nother beast, and it is it's frightening. And to me, it's 0.0 surprise that there's tons of pedestrian accidents and fatalities here. You just drive that area kind of any time of the day or night. You'll see what we're talking about.
Yeah, and look, I get it. I don't necessarily want police time to be spent handing out jaywalking tickets to the high and homeless. But the fact is that these are the folks that are driving this particular issue. And, we have people in this city now who are theoretically, I guess, enforcing laws that are not fully police officers. This might be the kind of opportunity to, uh, get after this problem in a more direct way. I'm not saying, that part of East Central is not exactly a super high traffic area. You can probably get away with uh, having a few less two less lanes of traffic and what they're trying to do. But we've also spent a lot of money. This kind of construction doesn't come cheap. We could be filling potholes. We could be improving the safety of a wide variety of roads and byways in our state and our city. It just strikes me as we're doing something yet again where we're spending money on a problem where we're not really going after the heart of the problem, and it is not going to ultimately improve the situation. But we're gonna move on. I have it on good authority that the governor is going to call a special session, possibly in September, to deal with the Medicaid changes and the issues that the federal legislation known as the Big Beautiful Bill is going to throw at New Mexico. We'll see what exactly this means. The Albuquerque Journal had a very uh, significant spread when it comes to their editorial pages on Sunday with numerous articles, and I want to highlight one. Liz Thompson, who has called our medical provider shortage. She basically mocked the idea that that was a real issue in New Mexico. She wrote an article that appeared in the paper and claimed that there was some legislative finance committee report. They're the nonpartisan legislative agency that runs a lot of numbers. She claimed that there's not that this LFC report had highlighted some results that she happens to like, mostly involving, again, spending tax dollars. She wants to pay clinicians enough to attract and remain them, help physicians pay down their student loan debt, do more strategic recruitment by the state of New Mexico, assist providers with down payments to buy homes in New Mexico, and ensure state backed financial incentive directly benefit providers in New Mexico instead of out of state medical corporations. Now, Wally, I definitely want your take on these. I'm not saying they're all 100% terrible ideas uh, if you're simply focusing on the medical provider shortage, but there are ways, starting with medical malpractice reform, starting with the gross receipts tax, and numerous others, that ways that we can actually solve many of our medical provider shortage and healthcare related issues without putting the state of New Mexico and the taxpayers of the state on the hook for all of these kinds of expenses.
Well, Paul, this is classic government. It's like, okay, we've created the problem, and so now we're going to not undo the thing that created the problem. In this case, I do believe a huge part of it's the medical malpractice crisis we find ourselves in. But we're going to layer on top of that another government program that's going to make everything all better. And she's very dismiss. I want to give her an A+ for propaganda, Paul. It was brilliant. So you read that if you don't know much about this issue, like uh, Liz Thompson has taken care of it. Everything is under control. The healthcare situation is done. We don't need to talk about the advocacy groups, which have to do with uh, whether the trial attorneys get paid unlimited amounts of damages or not. We don't have to deal with the gross receipts tax. So the two things that are safe is let's spend more money getting doctors. Again, Paul, Jimmy just say, I won't even waste any breath arguing against that. It's like, fine, we can do that. We probably do need to do that as a state with all the damage that we've done. But to say that we should just let our medical malpractice go unabated and not take a look at that as one of the huge underlying causes. And then the final point I'll make is that the doctors that are leaving the state, many of them are not family practice doctors, the type of which, and I'm not, this is zero disrespect to family practice, but I believe you can be a more effective family practice doctor earlier in your career than you can be, say, a neurosurgeon, for example, or an advanced oncologist. And so when we have something like the OBGYNs leave the state, some of those, the experience required to deal with the tough cases, that just does not happen easily or well with newly minted UNM med school graduates. There's a time of curing where if you're not in a practice that even has neurosurgery, there's probably no way to even gain that experience in New Mexico. So, yeah, to say that that's all we need to do, I just do not believe that's the case. And it's amazing we won't look at any of the other things that we've talked about a lot. That would they do everything, but to alleviate the problem, no. But they certainly have accelerated the demise of healthcare. And then finally, she talks about, and there's some weird wording in there about we're around the median, or whatever, from a number of doctors' point of view. Well, guess what? New Mexico, we have an older population. When you have an older population, you need more than the median level of physicians to provide healthcare because it happens at a higher level as you age. Just to compare, Utah has way less per capita medical providers, but guess what? They're a lot younger than we are here in New Mexico. So, yeah, to just say that we're going to declare victory and go home and we don't need to talk about this, I think the person seeking health care in New Mexico is going to find out that this problem is, even with this announced program, probably going to get worse before it gets better.
Now, my concern, of course, is that this is the be all end all that we talk about in September, because Liz Thompson and the governor are pretty closely aligned philosophically. Yeah, and it's much easier and more likely for the folks in Santa Fe to simply spend a bunch of money on these kinds of what amounts to subsidies. Now, unlike the film subsidy where we can take or leave the film industry, yeah, I get it. We want doctors to practice here. That is a net good for the state of New Mexico. But I think what Thompson is doing here is putting blinders on and focusing on just one feature of our health issues. She is not willing to kind of look broadly at all of the different issues facing our healthcare problems and creating this crisis. And a lot of those policies are made in Washington, D.C., not just the Medicaid reductions that we saw recently. There's a lot of factors at play there. And she, of course, refuses to acknowledge the role that Medicaid itself plays in our over-reliance on Medicaid plays in the healthcare crisis that we face as well. So she's very keyed in on certain areas that involve spending lots of taxpayer dollars. So Liz Thompson is a perfect fit for New Mexico and its political leadership, because it always comes down to, we're going to spend more money and we're going to ignore all the other ways and issues that we can address this policy failure. We're just going to focus on how we can hand out more of your money to a certain group. And yeah, it might work. It may not be sustainable, but it might work for a given time period. But making New Mexico a more attractive place for prospective medical professionals to live their lives, better education system, better public safety, lower taxes, more diversified economy, etc. Those also could be factors as well, in addition to some specific medical provider related policy reforms. So
Yeah,
It's
and then one final
yeah. Go
point,
ahead.
Paul, is that her plan may help get more doctors into New Mexico, new doctors, but more doctors. Doesn't do anything for the doctors that are already leaving to
True.
continue to leave because of high medical malpractice. The fact that how they're graded as their career moving to other states, spending much time in New Mexico puts you on almost a blacklist because you're going to have many settled malpractice claims as we've heard. So yeah, it is maybe part of the solution, and I would even just say fine, it's part of the solution, but it is not the full solution, and I don't think it's going to be effective
All right.
by
We're gonna
itself.
we're gonna leave things there for now. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. Find all episodes at tippingpointsnm.com or at the Rio Grande Foundation's YouTube channel. Subscribe to the show at Apple, Stitcher, or tell Google Home to play Tipping Point New Mexico. Thanks to Path 3 Marketing for producing this show.